Hello and welcome to ATM's group webinar on how to leverage data lineage for business insights. My name is Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor at ATM Group and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Our expert speakers today are Olga Majdancik, Assistant Vice President, Enterprise Data Management, formerly at Voya Financial, Rob Goodliffe, International Head of Data Management at Wells Fargo, and Philip Dutton, CEO and founder at Solidatus. I'll ask them all to introduce themselves in a little bit, but first a few hints and tips for you. To the right of your screen, you'll see a Slido panel. In there, there's two channels. One is for some poll questions, so we'll be running 4 today, so please do answer those questions as we go along. And in the other panel, you'll be able to ask your questions to the speakers, so please put those into the panel whenever you'd like to, and we'll gather them together and answer them at some point during the webinar. Okay, that's great enough of me, and let's come back to our speakers. And Olga, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your interest here.
Hello, my name is Olga Majdancik, and I am an information management practitioner, educator, and evangelist. So I've been fortunate enough to be part of the data management initiatives in such organizations as Citibank and Deutsche Bank and AIG and recently at Voya Financial. So I've been in a room where it happened. So I'm happy to share everything I know about this. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Over to you, Rob.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name's Rob Goodliffe. I'm the International Head of Data Management for Wells Fargo. My career started in product control within the finance team and middle office roles at Dresdner Kleinwort Wasserstein, Lehman Brothers, and JP Morgan. I gradually moved into more sort of project-aligned roles, and then following a kind of a large loss in our division and a subsequent lack of faith in the management information that was being used to explain it, I moved into data management. Initially, kind of doing very kind of tactical fixes and kind of upscaling our capabilities. But as the role got more and more formalized within chief data offices and so on, moved into the corporate finance chief data office of JP Morgan before moving to Wells Fargo within an international role, working across all the work streams. I've been on the sharp end using data, so a big appreciation of the challenges involved when you're on the reporting side of things, and always keen to make sure that the data management function provides the best support possible to those business users.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed, and over to you, Philip.
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah. So Philip Dutton, as you mentioned, CEO and founder here at Solidatus. And Solidatus, we're a connected governance solution. We focus primarily on working with, very data-rich, regulated organizations, and really kind of trying to create new tooling that will enable kind of the data management function to really start to move to where it should be, which is in a sustainable pattern, as opposed to, I think, where we've been in the past, which is a much more archaeological kind of discover what we've already done pattern. And for me, that's kind of a really critical piece for us to help clients move to that position. Again,
okay, thank you very much indeed. So all of you, some great expertise in the room. And I think we have a poll already up on your screen, so please vote for that one. This one asks, to what extent is your organization using data lineage? Obviously, it's a scene setter for us to see where everybody's at. So if you voted on that one, that's great. So let's run another one if we may. This one says, to what extent is your, no, we've done that one. This one says, what are the key purposes of data lineage at your organization? This time there are multiple options for you to choose, and please tick as many boxes as are relevant to your organization. And while you do that, let me come to Olga to set the scene and tell us to what extent, for what purposes she sees lineage being used across the financial institutions.
Hi, so I want to talk about a couple of things. So firstly, let's talk about compliance. And I want to start with data privacy because it has a lot of implications. So imagine that a data element being labeled as the personal identifiable information, or PII, in one of the applications. So with data lineage, you can carefully follow this element as it travels through the company, and then you can tag it as PII in all other applications on the lineage path. So this tagging helps to provide clarity on which data element can be used and for what specific purposes. And right now, in the age of AI, that's become more important than ever. So regulatory compliance, Philip kind of mentioned that that's what Solidaris is really good at. So regulators, especially in important assessment like CCAR or BCB S239, it's all about transparency. They want to see where the data come in and how it changes before it appears in all those reports. So this is where data lineage comes into play, because it gives us a very clear map of how reports are put together. I cannot not say anything about the operational efficiency. And again, example, every company has data quality management and resolution process implemented in some kind of shape or form, right? And in most cases, this process is like solving a very, very complicated puzzle. So it often takes a lot of time and a lot of resources to figure out where exactly data quality issues occurred and who can fix it and who can solve it, etc. So if we would have a really good data lineage, we would make a real difference, because it would cut down the time needed to solve those complex problems by a lot. Now, speaking of data quality, lineage actually gives data quality analysts some kind of like a picture on where to create data quality rules. And unfortunately, in many cases, data quality analysts are not exposed much into the business. So this lineage actually helps them to do the job properly. Now, everybody is right now moving data somewhere or doing some kind of like digital transformations, but after all those big words, we need to do data integration, right? So that's where the lineage is really, really important. And at the beginning of every business or IT project, you need to bring data together from different sources and systems. And lineage helps us to understand and link this data from different sources. And if you don't have this lineage, guess what? Every project starts with the exercise of data lineage collection, and you do it typically in PowerPoints or Visio diagrams. Finally, you want to talk about data breaches, right? If data are exposed somehow, if you have lineage, you can quickly identify what data was affected and take all the appropriate action to notify affected individuals or regulatory bodies. So this, in a short, this is kind of like the main usages of lineage now.
Okay. Well, you're obviously very well practiced at it. So let me come to you, Philip. What do you see when you're out there in the market? You obviously see a lot of firms. What sort of extent is the adoption, and what are the use cases on the whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, just reiterating what Olga said, really, I think, you know, for a lot of financial services firms, the first port of call is definitely the regulatory aspect, so kind of compliance. And you see that kind of as the regulators are trying to increase the level of trust across, you know, the organizations that they're regulating, so that they're confident in the data that they're receiving, because the regulators are using that to make, you know, judgments and to understand impact at a, you know, a more macro level than just, you know, a singular organization. As you move through the levels of maturity, then you start to get into organizations who are really seeing that regulatory spend as an opportunity for operational efficiencies. You know, how exactly, as Olga said, how can we reduce costs by being more efficient with our time and our resources? They're the things which typically we get limited in the, you know, the financial services space. And having spent almost 20 years kind of inside these very large organizations, I've seen very much the firsthand of how big a team needs to be in order to document kind of the data flows in order to achieve a project, and then for that team to be stood down and re-stood back up. There is a huge amount of waste. And, you know, we sort of looked at it and tried to quantify it. And even if it was, you know, a 5% or 10% kind of operational inefficiency, that adds up to more than $1 trillion that the industry is wasting every year. And I think that's why, as Olga mentioned, that blueprint becomes so critical. It gives you the ability to immediately assess impact, to immediately scope projects, to immediately understand the risk of an intrusion of bad data quality across your business. And so I think it is becoming more and more a fundamental piece of the core data management you know, capabilities for all organizations.
Okay, that's great, Philip. Thank you. Let's see what our delegates are doing at the moment. So thank you. Let's see that first poll result. Philip, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think this really is typical of what we see. I think, in the past, data lineage has been the thing that nobody wants to attack because it is so difficult in that archaeological sense. We didn't have the capabilities, we didn't have the operating model that would make it something that was, fine for a CFO to sign off on his budget line, right? It stands out as a significant cost base. So it doesn't surprise me. I think the really nice thing that I'm certainly seeing across the market is that, the others kind of that are listed there are really on the increase. If we had have done this probably, 3 years ago, I think you probably would have got much more on the limited extent because it was just not a non-sustainable kind of task. Whereas now I think that's definitely changed.
Okay, and following on the other poll results, please, about purposes and usage. Well, yep, as we said, regulatory compliance. And Phil, does the rest of that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting one because understanding data, it kind of strikes me of the questions that we're asking are really very, very basic, and they're very kind of really fundamental to our business. Like, when we're asking things about like, where is my data? What data do I have? What can I use it for? Imagine if the same kind of questions were being asked about the parts in an airplane engine, right? What parts do we have? What do they do? What impact does it have on the overall kind of ability for an airplane to fly? Like, it's just not an acceptable kind of question to be asking. Whereas I think for us, we've really got to continue to mature in this space because a lot of these are basic questions which we should have the answer for. And as I said, now with the new technologies and kind of operating models available, this can be something which we can achieve. So it doesn't surprise me, that's for sure.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your votes. We will run another poll question right now. And this one asks, what are the challenges of implementing and developing data lineage at your organization? So take your time to fill those in. And again, you can tick as many boxes as are appropriate. And let me bring in Rob to talk about the challenges he sees of implementing and sustaining data lineage.
Yeah, and it is certainly a challenge. I've been involved in a number of kind of data lineage initiatives previously with mixed results, to be honest, but there is huge value there. And there is a way to do it to gain great results for the business. So the challenges, I would say, in a lot of modern organizations, definitely in financial services and sort of large banks and large organizations, you've got a very varied tech stack that you've got to look across, and you've got to collate a lot of information across that stack from varied sources and make sense of it and put it in plain business language what your lineage is. You're not producing something solely for technologists, you're producing something for the business. So really that is a huge manual effort. And as someone from within the Chief Data Office, it's not something we can do on ourselves. We can't staff up entirely within the Chief Data Office as the data people to compile the data lineage. You need to be able to speak to the report owners, the technologists who support the reporting tools, and also all the upstream systems that feed into it. And it's a huge challenge. So it's getting the buy-in from those people who are going to support you in the lineage, and it's telling them the picture of what you're going to produce at the end of it and what those advantages are, as kind of Olga and Philip had alluded to. So that's one of the challenges. The second challenge I sort of touched on as well, there's lots of documentation. This is the frustration of the process. We're documenting what's already there, but it's already there in silos and documents that one tech team owns and another tech team owns and a report owner owns. We're trying to unify that and make it into a comprehensive kind of piece of information. So it's just out of reach, and we're always kind of talking to technologists and getting a piece of quasi code maybe and putting it into business language. So that's the large manual effort at the moment to overcome, to be able to talk to technologists and take technical guidance and documents and turn it into business language to be commonly understood by senior management and subject matter experts.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you very much indeed. Olga, what's your experience here? What are the challenges to implementing and keeping it all going?
I'd say challenges are everywhere, but I roughly divide them into two sides. One is technology side and the other one is business side. So I want to talk about technology first. So the corporate landscape is ever changing and it's very, very diverse. So large organizations often have a mix of technologies in play, and we're talking about legacy mainframe, COBOL files, and then we have modern data cloud solutions. So, and they might have data on-prem, and they might still use Hadoop infrastructure. And on top of that, companies have multiple BI tools. So here is the challenge. We want to automatically, because manual efforts are not sustainable, we want to automatically connect all those technical components and build this complete lineage path, not just path from system A to system B, but the path like from many different systems. And ideally, we need to utilize crawlers, right? That's what the vendors are providing us to automatically collect this lineage. Still, manual efforts, they are not scalable. Unfortunately, not all the tool can handle different technologies for extracting lineage. And even if vendor claims that the technology supports, like, let's say, SQL statements, you might discover that not all statements are supported, right? So you might discover that merge statement or update statement or insert into statement is not supported, but the vendor is saying, yeah, we do that. Now, furthermore, many people write SQL statements different ways, like dynamic SQL almost never supported. So, and the thing is, vendors are faced a very daunting task of constantly integrating new technology into the tools. And this is very challenging. And I sometimes think that they are trying to catch the moving train. That's how I feel about the vendors, because every new technology requires update in the lineage solution. Every new pipeline tooling requires updates to the lineage crawlers. So it's really tough for vendors to stay current all the time. So, and if vendor cannot provide the required functionality, then we have to create custom solution. And again, now we are talking about expenses of maintaining very expensive people, on our side. Now let's move to business side. I said, like, there are two sides. So lineage is truly valuable when we gather both technical and business lineage, because lineage tools can handle the technical details, which collect the table names and the field names, whatever is in our data stores. However, sometimes those names are so cryptic, and making the connection between these technical elements and the business names, we absolutely have to have a business glossary first. So you cannot implement lineage until you have a full, good business glossary. And you need to have a connection between the business terms and the physical data elements. Creating this connection is really, really hard. And by the way, I have a high hopes for AI use case, because AI can populate those business terms for the fields that are extracted by those data crawlers, and hopefully to bridge the gap between the semantic and technical lineage views. So in this case, then the business audience can gain some kind of an understanding of what the lineage is about, not just the technology people. So.
Okay, we'll come back to some of that later in terms of the elements, the AI and so on, because we're moving pretty quickly in these technologies. Let's see the poll results on that one if we could. And Rob, would you like to make a comment on those? Here come the challenges. A top one, I think we see quite often. The second one we see quite often. Are those the sort of things that you've experienced?
Yeah, I didn't see this poll before I made my points, but I think this is very, very similar to what I'm saying. The data in silos, the data itself, as well as the kind of documentation in silos, gap between IT and the business, kind of the data function is almost there as a translation. Lack of management buy-in is very interesting, because again, probably technologists and people from finance operations complaining because of these data people taking up so much of their time with all these manual quests that maybe in the past haven't yielded kind of tangible business benefit. So I'm not surprised by anything. Not enough budget, that's probably there always. So required skills, I don't know. I think a good sort of analyst and generalist that knows their way around the business, knows a tiny bit of code, could probably do it. So I wouldn't say that the skills for compiling lineage is so niched. So that's the one that maybe surprises me a little, but like everything else, completely in line with my experiences.
Okay, thank you. And coming back to you, Phil, and Olga touched on this. How do you see the elements for successful lineage solution? What are all the pieces? And then we'll talk later about how you put them together.
Yeah, no, I mean, and Olga touched on some great points, and I think she highlighted kind of the problem in the operating model. If you think about kind of what she was talking about, kind of those scanners that we all have to have and that we all build to try and connect to new bits of technology as they arrive. they're scanning what we've already done, right? So we've got a database, we've built it, we're kind of operating with it, and then we're applying a scanning technology to document that. So it's kind of the wrong way around. What we need to do is to get the operating model where before we even build something, we have it documented, because actually we do document it before we build it, because otherwise a technologist doesn't know how to build it. So there's an operating model change that needs to occur. And I think for organizations that are very, very large, it's very difficult because you have such a heterogeneous space of technology that is constantly changing. But for me, I kind of think of successful lineage in three parts. So first, there is kind of the in, and that's all about automation and augmentation. So automation is the, as Olga talked about, kind of the connectors out there to go and harvest your ETL code, to pull in your schemas from your databases, to understand, microservices, reports, etc. As much as we can automate in that space, we should be automating, because a lot of that is just the rails, right? This stuff is parsable, it's understandable. The augmentation piece is, then if you have a human in the loop, how can you make them as quick to execute on the tasks that they need to as possible? And that's really kind of helping them with, as Olga mentioned, there's some AI capabilities there, there's machine learning there. There's a whole range of capabilities that you can deploy to help each individual do their job much more quickly. So then there's, once we've got the data in, then it's how we manage it. And so I think what we've seen is, the management is no longer just focused on what we have today. The regulators want to see what we had yesterday and 6 months ago. And for a future state, we need to be able to understand like where we're going, what we'll provide to a regulator in 6 months, but equally what will show our business as value in a year's time as part of a transformation. So the management then needs to support the same management, change management that your organizational does. And typically that's something like Git, which is used by your technology teams to manage branch-based version control effectively. So you can have multiple streams running in parallel, and they don't just kind of cause a bottleneck on one main highway. The last piece then is kind of, and probably the most important piece is, okay, we've got the data. Now we need to see it, we need to understand it so we can actually make decisions from it. So for me then, the visualization of the data that we've captured is critical. And in the past, we've always looked at a screen kind of this close, and you see a data element. Maybe you see a data element in one hop, but you need to be able to zoom out and see the macro of an organization to really see like where the challenges lie that maybe impact a reg report, that may impact your customers. And once you can get that macro view, then you can drill into kind of the micro to solve the problems. But the visual for me is kind of one of the most important bits. And it's at scale, because, a Wells Fargo doesn't have 3 databases. They've probably got 300,000 databases. And of that kind of 300,000 databases, you're talking tens of millions of fields, all interconnected. So you're then talking about billions of connections. And so it is a scale which we've never experienced before. I think it was yesterday that I was speaking to someone that said 90% of data in the world has been created in the last 2 years. If you continue on that exponential scale, like the problem never gets any smaller for Rob and for Olga, in their daily lives. It only kind of grows.
Okay, that's great. Rob, from a practitioner's experience, what pieces do you think are needed to put this all together? Do you agree with Phil, or have you got something to add?
I agree with Phil, and I would take a more kind of business and operational model approach to my answer. But I think the number one thing is lineage isn't a standalone exercise. It's not like, and we've got to do lineage and we're going to have a project to map the lineage, and then the results, everyone will be interested in the results and they'll just kind of naturally use them. Like lineage absolutely needs to be embedded in an integrated approach to data governance. If you just kind of look at the first 2 principles of BCBS 239, the very first one is governance. The second one is architecture. Essentially, how do you govern your architecture? And I would say architecture, you state some sort of target state architecture, and you've got a means to describe it and apply it to your system stack. How do you govern it? It's data lineage. It's actually saying, for our key uses of data, where does that data come from? Is it coming from our brand new data lake that we just built and we're trying to get everyone to use? Or is it coming from this Excel user tool that's been in finance for 20 years? So, lineage is absolutely integral to data governance. It's not like an academic side project. It needs to be right in the middle, and it needs to be a key component of governing its data and assessing its progress. Like, what percentage of your top tier reports are coming from the authorized data sources as opposed to user tools and so on. So that's really important. Making data lineage completely central. And secondly, and kind of related, is delivering a business benefit. So I spoke about some of the exercises I've been involved in that had mixed results. They really were academic exercises where we were just trying to show how all the systems were interconnected within a function or within a line of business. And I think the data people enjoyed it, and we enjoyed looking at the kind of visualization at the end of it and following the lines through. But to be useful for the business, as Olga mentioned CCAR. CCAR's a data assault course for banks, and if you can actually map the lineage, just start with one thing. Map the lineage just for CCAR, but if you were to map the lineage for CCAR, then the owners, the people who control the process, that's a tangible benefit for them to see all their upstream systems that they can be impacted by, and to give them the kind of credibility with their regulators that, hey, we've got this mapped, we know what the systems are. So very much, I would say, don't try and boil the ocean and map everything. Work backwards from key uses of data and compile the lineage that way. So that they are the two elements for success. One, embedding it in governance, and two, making it useful for the business by focusing on data use.
Okay, that's fine. And you've sort of answered the second question about putting it together, but I'm going to ask Philip to comment on that too. You showed us the elements separately. How would you advise people to sort of put them together to create an agile solution that will be pretty future-proof?
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree with Rob. I think, we've all suffered in the past from the let's just try and do it all, and let's just try and document everything we have. And the problem is the organization that you work within never sits still. It never stops. And so, that approach will never be successful unless you can stand up kind of, the world's largest team and have them kind of, execute kind of flawlessly. So the purpose, as Rob said, becomes critical. It's what are we doing this for? Why are we doing this? Once we understand that, then kind of the understanding what bits we need to focus on becomes really, really very easy, right? We have a defined scope. And so, as Rob said, it's not just about the lineage. The lineage is one of the components that is critical to building a data governance function. But like with CCAR, with BCBS 239, it's all about kind of governing and understanding your data. And so the future proofing is then starting to think about op models and thinking about kind of the automation piece. But again, it's for a purpose. Once you do one purpose, you should get reuse across the second purpose and across the third purpose. So, you're eating the elephant kind of step by step, as opposed to just trying to boil that ocean. And I think that really is how you make it future-proof, because it becomes then part of the organization's DNA. If we're going to do something, we do this. Once we've done that, then we can move on to the next step. It's not, hey, I've built a great new data lake. Now can you kind of map it for me into our estate? It's like, no, we've already done that. Like, as part of our ability to stand it up in production, it already had to be mapped into our ecosystem so we could understand what data was going to be coming from there as authoritative, what data is there in duplicate, etc. And so you understand that kind of first up. And I think that's how you get there.
Okay, that's great. And coming back to you, Olga, if I may, what types of technologies and solutions and services are helpful here? Or is there are vendor solutions, but other particular sort of underlying techniques and techs that are helpful?
Well, before I go to technologies, let me just expand 1 minute on how I view the lineage. I view lineage in layers, and let me explain you this. So, for example, if you want to build some kind of entertainment center, you need to create tons of maps, right? You need to see the map of population density, and then where your utilities are, and your topographic map and everything. And you kind of like see it in layers, and then the whole picture come up of what's this land is about. So the same way I view lineage has to also come in layers. There is a technical layer, there is a business layer. I also think that operational layer is extremely important. And the whole lineage, successful lineage, needs something to bring it together. So I think we already beat to death the technical side, how important it is to get the crawlers, right? Now I want to talk about business layers. So I already mentioned that there is a business glossary right now. What's important about business glossary and the way to success is actually have some kind of classification efforts and classification solution being operational within the company. So I do see in many organizations that there are already classification efforts, but they tend to focus on classifying data by sensitivity layers. For example, whether it's public or internal or confidential or highly sensitive, or some classify data by risk layers, for example, like low risk, moderate, high risk. However, there are very, very limited efforts in classifying data by the content or by the business domain. I'm talking about using business ontologies and taxonomies. So this way, if you have this automated classification, you know that, hey, this piece of data is vendor pricing data. This is, transactional data. This is, etc. So we are talking about, like, you get the kind of like a black box and you feed the file and then you say, hey, I know what this data is. I don't have to, do anything about that. So we need glossaries, we need data dictionaries, and we need connection between the two. And now, in terms of getting adoption of data lineage, we really need to talk about use cases, and we need to, for example, one of the use cases, let's make our pipelines more efficient. We don't want to see it one pipeline and one pipeline here. We want to see the whole path, right? So it's not about where the data come from. Sometimes it's also about how fresh the data are, right? When they were last updated, and how long it took for pipeline to run. So we do also need technology that can gather this operational metrics and blend them in with our lineage data. So we are talking about data pipeline logs. We are talking about parsing programs, all kind of DQ and data observability tools. So as I said, all those technologies need to bring together and create those layers of lineage for the audience to use. So that's my take.
Okay, fine. And when you're building solutions, Philip, what sort of technologies are you looking at now?
Yeah, I think this really goes to kind of to Olga's point, right? Is this isn't a singly dimensional, data set that we're working with. It's a very diverse data set, and so with that, a data set that changes very, very frequently doesn't live naturally in a relational database, because every time you need to make a change to the type of data that you're collecting, you need to change your schema, and so you're then tied into an IT change cycle, and it makes it very difficult for organizations to use. So for me, the only technology that really fits into this space is graph technology. So graphs are fantastic at being able to relate all types of disparate data together, and you'll see with kind of large language models, etc., kind of and kind of the vectors that are being used within them, sort of a similar sort of basis. So for me, the graph technology is something that we've really embedded into our product, because it was, the choice which gave us the flexibility to have lineage against controls, against quality, against cost, against risk classifications, against use classifications, against, geographic classifications, against business unit classifications, regulatory classifications. So you can have all of those different dimensions in the one graph and be able to present it in a way that a business user cares about for their particular use. So your person who's in charge of cyber is going to want to see a very different lens over that kind of data estate than someone who is looking at sort of CCAR, or someone that is looking at kind of, let's say it's the CFO and he's looking at kind of line items for budget. Each of them needs the same rails, but they need to understand kind of the data through that different lens, as Olga mentioned. And then for me, as I mentioned before, I think it's the management of that. And I think the Git style, branch-based, multi-threaded management is the only way that this is really possible. As Rob said, he can't stand up a team to do it for the business. It needs to be federated out into the business. And in order to do that, you need to have a technology which can natively support those types of collaboration. So whether it's kind of tasks being centrally pushed out, or whether it's kind of your branch and fork model, this is how every organization changes on the planet now, with kind of the code So the governance should match to that change model. And so we're using the same technology conceptually to do that. And so that's the two technologies that we think are kind of the really interesting intersection that we've managed to pull together.
Okay, fantastic. And staying with you, Philip, pulling all that all together, how can you leverage actionable data insights from the data? I hear what you're saying, that it's a business and a tech issue working hand in hand, and with the right techs you can see everything all in one place. Can you describe to me sort of the sort of business insights you could gain?
Yeah, and I think this kind of comes down, comes back to Rob and Olga's points around kind of that business purpose. And for us, I guess we're lucky because we get exposed to so many clients and so many of their different use cases. And while there is the natural kind of, CCAR, BCBS 239, kind of DFS 504 regulatory compliance, GDPR type aspects, I think that is kind of one bucket. But then we're very much encouraging kind of our clients to think more broadly. So, new challenges in the space. Olga mentioned privacy, so cross-border data sharing, a real challenge for organizations that operate kind of in a multinational way. Operational resiliency, something that kind of a number of regulators have started to increase the pressure on. You're starting to think about, like, how do we actually create new data products from the data that we already have so we can start to create some monetization. Then you start to think about kind of management of the estate. So whether it's API, microservice management, all of these different business use cases, it could be sanctions, everything benefits from having that well-defined blueprint of impact. So regulation changes, I can tell how it impacts, excuse me. Or if my business changes, I need to sell off a large part of my business. How do I extract that? How can I transform our business and not spend 5 years with a big four consultancy kind of walking through that program? I think there is a lot of opportunities in the business space when we think about this, not just as the technical level. I think that's what we all get stuck in, is system to system, but actually this is kind of obligation to process to policy to people. And once we get to that level, then the business can really start to explore advantages.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on and ask some audience questions to our speakers. I'm going to put this one back to you, Phil. Are you ready? It says, sure. In addition to lineage tools, the use of persistent non-changing identifiers both at the entity and instrument level is critical. The legal entity identifier is available in many data vendor feeds and from Glyph directly. Should the LEI be considered more so for data lineage models and be more greatly included?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. And for me, one of the things that I'm always pushing on is the more that we can create standardization, the more that we help the whole industry move forward. And so things like LEI are a great example where, you're coming together as an industry to say, all of us having a different identifier for all of our different kind of counterparties is just madness, because we're duplicating the same effort over and over and over and over again. So I 100% think that the more that we as a collective industry can move towards standardization, that we're all going to benefit. So I think, it should definitely be kind of something that we're very focused on. And actually we are, with the EDM Council and with DAMA and a number of the data organizations, trying to push for more standardization, whether it's across ESG, whether it's across, data management, data quality assessments and things like that. But yeah, 100%.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. And coming to you over this one, how can firms win business buy-in for data lineage? You mentioned the step-by-step bit, but how can they persuade people this is a very good idea?
Is it me?
Yeah, how can people get business buy-in for lineage?
How can get buy-in? I think, honestly, I think you need to create a business case, and I'm talking about serious business case where you put together how much money you're going to spend and what are you going to get in return. Actually, it is kind of like could be put down in a spreadsheet, but it will require some kind of digging in information and very, very carefully sifting through the resources and time spent. And for example, one of the tangible benefit is, let's say, change management, right? When we are making any update to any system or any transformation initiative, so we need to understand how data move around, right? And manual managing all these changes requires a lot of back and forth communication between various groups. It's time consuming. We are talking about, before we even started the project, for 2 months probably, we're talking back and forth, back and forth. If you would have lineage, right, you can strike this time. This is like cost avoidance for all practical purposes. So you do create the business case, and this is how you try to convince. Another scenario, for example, sometimes in 2020, Zhemak Deglani, she introduced the data mesh, right? And one thing from this whole concept stuck to every organization now, everybody wants to kind of like treat data as a product, right? What does it mean, the product? Like, let's say we're talking about shoes. The shoes that were made today should be exactly the same as were made yesterday and exactly the same as will be made like tomorrow. So we have to have a consistent kind of like I don't know, like the sausage making factory that creates our data. And if we are doing every updates, every version, and again, we need to know and we need to consistently replicate the whole thing, right? So in this particular case, without lineage, you cannot literally treat data as a product. So again, business case you are creating and you're trying to convince people. That's how I would think so.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And one for you, Rob, I think you might throw up your hands, but you'll enjoy it too. It says, what are the pitfalls when implementing lineage and how can they be avoided?
The biggest pitfall is lineage for lineage's sake as a standalone kind of academic exercise and not informing real business needs. And you burn a lot of bridges with technology and finance and operations if you've kind of made them spending hours and hours in your company explaining their lineage. So that really is the number one pitfall. Like as kind of Olga mentioned, like a well-designed sort of pitch for lineage would look at the benefits to the business and making sure that you're actually reducing your fines, closing out regulatory issues and so on. The pitfall is basically just delivering a product that doesn't do any of that and at great expense to the business. So but definitely stay focused on what you're trying to achieve in terms of business benefit.
Excellent, thank you. I've got one more to you, Philip. We do have somewhere, we have a couple of technical questions. I will pass them on to Solidaris after the webinar and hopefully they'll be able to help you. So wait for those. But this one is quite interesting. It says, we are a relatively small financial firm. Is there still a business case for data lineage? Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to kind of the point that I think's been made a few times is kind of the resource and kind of time. So if you think about kind of as an organization, how much time you spend for each change that you make. And as Olga mentioned, if every part of every change, the first thing is analysis, and the first part is kind of documenting what is already there and is probably already being documented once and then kind of lost because it leaves with a consultant, or it's something that you put into a wiki somewhere and then no one kind of looks at it again. Every project, you're wasting 20% of your budget. Now, if you just take that 20%, stack it together and go, actually, here we're going to do it once, we're going to do it properly. It doesn't have to be at a large scale, as Rob said, right? This is the purpose. Why do you want to do it? Once you've done that purpose, that's all you need to do. Once you've started, you're on that path. As long as you can keep it maintained and you don't let it fall out of kind of accuracy, keep it evergreen by little and often as opposed to big and infrequent, then you can achieve this even in a very small organization. We have some of our clients who are really very, very small, have very, very small data teams, but they're very front foot thinking. They think, what's got us to here is not going to get us to there in the next 10 years. And so if we just build this into our op model, we can make this not the big cost that's, that Rob and Olga and I've all experienced in sort of the very big organizations where this is a multi-million, tens of million kind of exercise and fines off the back of that potentially of hundreds of millions. You can do it small and often.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to our audience for your questions and to our speakers for their answers. And coming back to my questions and to Rob, looking forward, how do you see emerging use cases of lineage and what is the potential of integrating AI and its possible outcomes? Olga touched on AI, so we'll come back to that in a minute. So Rob.
just starting off with the emerging use cases. I think I would love to see, we're not there yet, but I would love to see a very comprehensive granular lineage to be mapped to enable a higher level of data governance and change management within the organization. And what I'm talking about here is typically within the data management organization, an error would be found in a report or maybe in a preventative data check. But generally, it's in a report. We do the root cause back and we say, okay, it's this field in this system. And it gets logged as an error on that field in that system, and it's impacting that one report that the person found in. But if you've got a good, comprehensive, well-documented data lineage model using a kind of standard taxonomy, you can actually say, okay, this field in this system is actually impacting these 20 reports. Just these not the other 19 haven't discovered it yet, and you can actually get out ahead. Like when you uncover a defect, you can actually uncover the scale of it across your organization, feeding downstream from the initial error, and get on top of it and send notifications out to those to the report impacted people to maybe say, okay, change your reports before they go out this quarter. We've uncovered this error, and you also get the change prioritized accordingly, because you can truly see the true impact of any defect. So again, it helps with tech prioritization and budgeting. So that's really from a sort of data management angle, just day-to-day change management as well. If I'm changing this field in my derivative system in a bank, I've got a kind of idea where it's going to impact, but there's so many unintended consequences. And again, just to be able to cut down on the analysis, like we've said previously, what you're going to impact, and say we're changing the sort of valid fields on this one. Make sure your mapping downstream is going to accommodate this in all your reporting platforms. That's a real kind of nirvana state where lineage is really plugged in and really at a granular level to enable that. With AI, I would just say auto harvesting of lineage. So again, kind of taking the stress off that manual collection of data, especially when everything's in code anyway. So you've got the codes in there, you've got the documentation sitting there. That's the frustration. There's so much manual work at the moment, just getting from that code and from that tech documentation into the sort of business documentation needed for lineage. If AI can develop something to auto harvest. I'm not a technologist, but basically to take the code, to take whatever technical documentation there is, make sense of it, and deliver a kind of lineage. Maybe given a kind of a language to use, phraseology defined by the business, and then the AI could start to put together at least a framework of the lineage to get started, and then a human could potentially review it to make sure it's kind of makes sense in a business context. But that's what I'd love to see from AI, and that'll be a huge benefit within the sort of data governance space.
Okay, Olga, you mentioned the AI earlier. Is that how you see it, or do you have that and other ideas?
I actually do, and I don't know, for some reason I'm all about maps today. So do you remember the paper maps when we used to navigate? We unfold the map and we will try to just go over the direction and look at the turn or everything. And then if we needed to have a gas station or bite to eat, we would open some other AAA book probably and try to superimpose the two and try to find the way around, right? What we're having right now, Google pretty much changed it, right? Right now, you are doing the search, right? You are not looking at the map and everything. So you are not using the map for visual presentation. You are looking at it for the search. Now, Philip mentioned that out of all the technologies that are really important is the graph technology. Now, to me, the power of lineage is not even the visual power of a lineage, how you could look at the lineage, but how can you use lineage graph search and actually find things. And basically, to me, there is a difference at the looking at the things and finding things. And I think finding things is much more important. And I believe the lineage right now is a little bit undervalued, right? Now, hopefully, within the next few years, it will change. The second one is I do really hope that all those AI models, they need to be trained for all practical purposes first. And without lineage, you can't really even train the models first. So we are not even talking about AI doing something for us. We are trying to put together AI solution, right? So we absolutely have to use the ethical training, and we shouldn't be using data that we are not supposed to when we are not paying for licensing and everything. So with that side, I think lineage is actually important, where you could trace back the origin of each data source to make sure that, yes, you can use it for your AI solution even, further. So.
Okay, so lots still to look at there, indeed. Okay, let's move on. We're getting short of time, but let's just run the final poll question. We won't comment on it, but let's see what people are thinking. And it asks, what extent of operational and business benefits does your organization gain or expect to gain from a successful implementation of lineage? So please do place your votes, and we'll have a quick glimpse at that in a moment. But again, let me come back to you, Rob. We touched on this. Where do you see the operational and business benefits of getting it right, and what are the penalties of getting it wrong?
So getting it right, the foresight on tech changes, like really touched on it on my last answer, but like not starting every change with analysis, having it there, and knowing where the tech changes are going to impact. The second big one I'd say is credibility with regulators. We use CCAR as an example. If you can show you've got it mapped, and if you can avoid having reporting errors that happens in all major banks, and always coming back to the regulators and having to explain, oh, we changed this field and this lookup failed, and it just never sounds good. And so if you can get that kind of full lineage feeding into your kind of key uses of data, such as CCAR or liquidity reporting or whatever it may be, and cut down the error rate, and also show that you're on top of the data and you know where it comes from, I think that's a huge business benefit.
Okay, same, and the penalties of getting it wrong?
I really touched on them, just the huge wasted effort, and
right,
no longer answering my phone calls when I try and ask them to do the next thing. So it's I guess you could say, if you mismap things, if you do it incorrectly, then you could be working off an incorrect map. But definitely in my experience, it's the not knowing what you're doing it for, in a precise enough detail, and wasting people's time.
Okay. Olga, what would you say there in terms of the business and operational benefits, and what happens if it goes wrong?
Well, I'm actually going to talk about what could happen when you get it wrong. So like everybody remembers COVID, right? And there were tons of machine learning programs that were attempted to predict infection rates and hospitalization rates and mortality rates and everything. So I'm from Chicago, right? Like Chicago, like many places, worried about huge surge patients overwhelming all the hospitals. So they build an extra hospital beds in the huge convention center at McCormick Place. But guess what? Those extra beds remained empty and weren't used much at all. So accuracy of those predictions that were used in the ML model were compromised due to issues with data quality, and guess what? Missing data lineage, because in some case, inconsistent testing, reporting practices, and all kind of like delays in data collections and missing collection and everything led to the unreliable input for the model. So we are talking about wasting of millions of dollars. So it's not just regulatory, it's like real money. So.
Okay. That's great. Let's see what our audience says in terms of what they're gaining or would expect to gain. Philip, do you want to have a quick comment on that?
So I think that should definitely be what kind of the driver is for an organization. I think there is significant operational benefits if we get this right. And I think we've all used kind of the analogy of a map or of a blueprint. And I think that's, when you think about just your house, if you didn't have a blueprint when you're trying to build your house, how long would your house take to build? It's much quicker when someone knows what they're building and why they're building it and where the bits go. And so I think, we will see, and we do see, huge operational benefits. I know one of our clients using our product to help them map and model all of their lending book across the entirety of this global bank. They were able to achieve a 90% efficiency in what they predicted they would do to what they were actually able to do, and this is through use of automation. This is use of that federated model that I talked about. And if you can achieve kind of those scales, then you're saving your organization tens of millions very, very easily. So it's really look for the low-hanging fruit and find some operational benefit, and then kind of keep moving on from there. You don't need to kind of solve the entire organization's problems. It's about, as Rob said, creating that credibility that we will deliver on what we said we will do. And if you do small and incremental, I think you build that trust.
Okay, that's great. We've covered a lot of ground. So let me come to my final question, if I may. And I'd like to ask all our speakers to offer some guidance for practitioners working on data lineage and using it to gain business insights. Olga, would you like to kick off here?
Yes, I have very short advice. Don't treat lineage just from one side, treat it from many different sides. Again, connect business, connect operational, connect technical, and put it all in context of your business processes and everything, because there is like just looking at the lineage, you just get overwhelmed. You have to kind of like sort it out.
Okay, Rob, what would you say?
I would say always work backwards from the data use and start with the very end point. So if you're sending out a regulatory report, we keep going on about regulatory reports, but it's the worst case scenario. If you're starting from a regulatory report, literally start with the file or the XML or whatever you're sending to the regulator, document the contents of that, and then work backwards. And that enables what Philip was saying in terms of just starting small. Start with something that's achievable, a key report to yourself, and document that all the way back to the systems of record, all the way back to the origination of the data, and then work sequentially from there. Don't try and start in the middle and document everything. You'll go mad.
Thank you. And Philip, some final advice from you, please.
Yeah, and I think really just kind of reconfirming what both Olga and Rob have said, right? It's start with that purpose, and as Rob said, kind of it's almost this: just look left, find the next hop, find the next hop. You don't need to document everything kind of to the nth degree of detail, even in those hops as you go back. It's very much about being really targeted with what you're doing. So, if you need to scan the entire database, scan the entire database. If you only need to scan 3 or 4 tables because that's where the critical data is, like just scan those 3 or 4 tables. You don't this isn't an exercise in just creating the biggest repository we can. This is creating the most value that we can. And I think the last thing is just start, right? Once you do one, show the value, incrementally go to the next one and go to the next one, and then you'll be able to deliver. Whereas if you pontificate and think about kind of it too much, you'll just end up spinning your wheels, and you'll never actually get the value that you could have got quite quickly. I think we always overestimate the effort. And with the new op models, with the new technologies, it really is very, very easy to get started and to kind of generate results.
Okay, thank you, Phil, and thank you to all our speakers for sharing their expertise and experience. Thank you too to Solidatas for sponsoring today's webinar. Just before we close, a few ATM Group webinars that may be of interest to you. We'll be talking about best practice approaches to integrating legacy data with the cloud on the 11th of October, that's just next week, and providing an update on data standards and global identifiers on the 19th of October. Then moving into November on the 7th, we'll be looking at the potential and pitfalls of large language models and generative AI. So that's it in terms of what we're planning in the next few weeks. There is more, but you can see that when you're on our website or when you click on any of those particular items. That's it for today. And thank you again to Olga, Philip, and Rob. And thank you to all of you who've joined us on the webinar. Please complete our feedback form, as we're always keen to hear your views and improve our products. Meantime, thanks again to you all, and goodbye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.